In Luke chapter 11, verse 2, one of the disciples came to Yeshua and inquired about him teaching the disciples how to pray, as John had taught his disciples how to pray. And Yeshua stated, "My Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come." And I'm sure that you will agree that we're living in a time where the world desperately needs the kingdom of God to manifest itself in the life of the believer. My name is Donald Jenkins, and I am excited to invite you to this 3-part video series where I'm going to be revealing a truth that cannot be ignored. So make sure that you share this video with everyone in your network, and don't go away. I will be right back. Welcome to Thy Kingdom Come webinar part 3. Again, my name is Donald Jenkins, your master purpose development coach, and I'm excited that you decided to take some time out of your busy schedule to get some very important insight as I continue to share with you the truth that cannot be ignored. So as always, make sure that you have a pen and piece of paper to take copious notes as we dive deep into part 3 of Thy Kingdom Come, which is a very critical insight that's needed for 21st century ministry. So before we dive deep in today's video, I want to kind of do a recap from the previous video. So make sure that you go back and you watch video 2 and video 1, and also make sure that you share those videos with as many people in your network as possible. So the thought that I want to talk about is the last thought that we mentioned in the last video, that revealed that Yeshua spent a lifetime showing us how to build the influence of God's kingdom in the character of men. And that can clearly be seen in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, that we know as the Beatitudes. And everything that he mentioned in the Beatitudes required a high degree of purpose, which is what we've been talking about throughout this entire video series, is that the reason why America has been experiencing a meaning crisis and we're one of the most dysfunctional countries on the planet is simply because we have a low purpose IQ. In other words, it's difficult to execute all of those things that Yeshua mentioned without a high purpose IQ. That's the reason why it's important that you join the ranks of a new breed of leaders that understand the skill set of how to work with believers in the capacity of raising their purpose IQ. And it's important simply because we cannot waste our lifetime sitting on the sidelines while the influence of Egypt undermines our growth potential. And that is the reason why America has become one of the most dysfunctional countries on the planet. It's simply because Egypt works to undermine our growth potential. And you're going to see that in this particular webinar. So make sure that you watch this webinar in its entirety all the way to the end, because I am going to reveal an eye-opening truth about the influence of Egypt and how Egypt worked against everything that you are preaching from the pulpit and that you teach even in your midweek Bible study. So you don't want to miss that particular part of this video. So let's start with our slide for this particular video set. And we're going to be talking about the character of men. And there's a thought at the top of the page, top of the slide, that reveals that the kingdom of darkness speaks through the character of men. So for us to say that heaven wants to speak through the purpose of the believer is not anything that's strange and out of the ordinary, because the kingdom of darkness is already speaking through the character of men. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you can go to any street corner in any city of America and you can see the kingdom of darkness speaking through the character of men. That's been displayed in so many ways, whether it be in business, whether it be in our homes, whether it be in churches. This is clearly evident that kingdoms desire to speak through the character of men. And well, guess what? God's kingdom is no different. It desires to speak through the character of men, but purpose development is the key to maximizing growth potential so that the voice of the kingdom can be heard in the world. And I'm sure that maybe you've never heard of purpose development. That's what we specialize here in at the Purpose Development Institute. This is the reason why I believe that God has allowed us to devote so much time and energy into purpose development, because we're truly disrupting the spiritual growth space and we're disrupting the personal growth space, because we need some solutions that will help us maximize our growth potential so that the voice of the kingdom of God can be heard in the world. We see the voice of the kingdom of darkness speaking loud and clear. Well, guess what? It's time for the voice of God's kingdom to be heard in the world. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is that we have to travel this path called purpose development, so that now we can maximize our growth potential. We can put the believer in a better position to add value back to the world. Now, here's a very powerful thought, and it declares that with purpose development, God's kingdom will influence the character of men, but without it, his kingdom will be compromised. And again, it doesn't take a rocket science to see how God's kingdom is being compromised through the life of the believer and all across the world, as men are not able to maximize their growth potential. And that's the reason why purpose development is such a critical resource, because it gives us that insight, that wisdom, so that we can understand how to maximize our growth potential and now allow the kingdom of God to influence the character of men in so many ways. So now we're going to shift. We're going to talk about a very powerful insight. This is the reason why you were invited to this particular webinar. It's going to take us back to what Yeshua said when he laid the foundation in Luke chapter 11, verse 2, as the disciples came and they sought instructions on how to pray. And he said, "Thy kingdom come." And here's a very powerful thought that you certainly need to make sure that you recognize. And that is that God's kingdom will never go where a man's character is not conditioned or developed to take it. I'm going to say that again. God's kingdom will never go where a man's character is not conditioned or developed to take it. And you're going to see that when we look at the Hebrew word for kingdom, you're going to see that it gives us the image. It gives us a clue as to what the kingdom is requiring from the believer. And I'm going to use the Hebrew letters to begin to reveal that to you, because I want you to understand the importance of being able to condition the character of the believer so that now they can take the influence of God's kingdom into the marketplace. They can take the influence of God's kingdom beyond the four walls of the church. So when we look at the word kingdom in Hebrew, it is pronounced mamlakah. Now, what we do here at the Purpose Development Institute, we conduct what we call a source root analysis. And the reason why the source root analysis is important, because they help us develop purpose skill. Now, our source root analysis basically allow us to examine each Hebrew letter from the Hebrew word. And the reason for that is because the Jewish rabbis say that when God spoke the world into existence, he actually spoke Hebrew, which leave a lot of wisdom connected to the Hebrew letters. This is the reason why we conduct that source root analysis, because it gives us those purpose skills, which can be defined as human existence that's basically connected to a higher purpose. Let me say it again. Purpose skills is basically human existence and performance that is connected to a higher purpose. So when we understand how to be connected to a higher purpose, then guess what? We're going to be able to add more value to the world. And that's why the kingdom has come to live in the heart of believers, because God wants us to be developed to the point to where we are connected to a higher purpose to add more value to the world. So we can see that Hebrew is read from right to left. So at the beginning of the Hebrew word for kingdom is the letter mem. And this is a very powerful and interesting letter, because it gives us even more insight as to the nature of the kingdom when it comes to how it is designed to manifest or speak through the purpose of the believer. So we see it as the letter mem. And when we look at the letter mem, it is symbolic for, guess what? Development and growth. That's right. The letter mem, which begins the word kingdom, mamlakah, it means development and growth. So here's the message that God is speaking to the church in the 21st century, that anything that's related to his kingdom has to undergo development and growth. Because without development and growth, then the kingdom's influence will never be able to speak through the purpose of men. And when that happens, then we're not going to be able to add value back to the world. So the kingdom give us a very important message and a mandate, and that is that we as leaders, we must help believers undergo the influence or this process of development and growth. So let's give you some biblical examples of how God left this clue from Genesis to Revelation. As you can see, the numerical value for the letter mem is 40. Now, 40 is represented many times in our Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, we see it raining on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. We see Moses spending 3 consecutive 40 days and 40 nights in God's presence. We see the nation of Israel spying out the land for 40 days and 40 nights. And because of that, they had to end up spending 40 years in the wilderness. In the New Testament, we see Yeshua being tempted by the devil for 40 days and 40 nights. And then we also see him spending 40 days and 40 nights with the disciples before he was taken up to heaven. Now, with that many indications of 40 from Genesis to Revelation, that's called a clue, because success leaves clues. In other words, God was basically communicating a message to the believers in the 21st century, and he was communicating the importance of development and growth. Let me give you one last modern day example of the numerical value of 40. When a woman is pregnant, the doctor based her terms of her pregnancy on 40 weeks, because it takes 40 weeks for that babe to develop and grow within the womb. So basically, God, again, is communicating a very powerful message, and that is what the kingdom is all about, is that when we come into the kingdom, then the number one thing that should be happening in the life of the believer is that we should be developing and growing. So this is important because Egypt worked against what we try to develop. In other words, the harder we try to develop, Egypt would try to undermine what we have developed. And that's the dilemma that we have in our country, especially in America. The reason why we are one of the most dysfunctional countries in the planet, because we live in a world, we live in a culture that we can classify as Egypt, that works hard to undermine the purpose of believers and non-believers alike. So let's go and let's look at the Hebrew word for Egypt. And as you can see, it begins with the letter mem as well, and it is pronounced Mitzrayim. And this is important because it gives us a very important message that you, as a ministry leader, you need to take copious notes on what Egypt is saying. Egypt has a message, and you need to understand this message, because I'm sure that you're preaching hard every week. I'm sure that you're spending a lot of time, making sure that the believers are inspired and that they are saved. But one of the things that we try to do here at the Purpose Development Institute, we try to give instructions that the human soul has 3 capabilities. Number one, it can be inspired, it can be saved, and it can harvest the energy of purpose. Now, we spent a lot of time inspiring the soul through success motivation, movies, in church, out of church. We can get inspiration from anywhere. And then when we come to church, we understand that we are in the business of saving the soul. But what we have failed to realize is that we should also be in the business of teaching believers how to harvest the energy of purpose. Because when we don't teach them how to harvest the energy of purpose, then we leave them at risk to be under the influence of Egypt. So we can see Egypt beginning with the letter mem. And you can see the letter mem have a small opening toward the end, toward the bottom of that letter. And that is important because it gives us a very important message that I want to reveal to you. Now, some Hebrew letters, when they appear at the end of a word, as you can see here on the screen that I'm highlighting for you now, it take upon a different form. And that's the letter mem at the beginning and at the end of the word Mizraim. Now, here's the message. The message is this, and that is that Egypt will welcome you with open arms. And once you're in its system, it will close in around you and make it difficult for you to discover to pursue, to hack your purpose, or to fully discharge your purpose, or to fully engage in your growth potential. That's what Egypt is designed to do. That's the reason why America is one of the most dysfunctional countries on the planet, because we have been hit hard with the influence of Egypt. And you understand Egypt as a type and shadow without God. Again, this is a very powerful revelation. So what happened is it put the believer in a position, instead of them saying thy kingdom come, they are in a position where now they say thy kingdom compromise. If we fail to help the believer raise their purpose IQ, they will compromise the influence of the kingdom simply because of the influence of Egypt. So here's what Egypt means on a grander scale. Egypt is a culture that shuns the wisdom of God. So men are blinded to the growth potential that comes from purpose. That's right. Purpose has a growth potential. Remember what I said earlier is that we teach individuals how to leverage the strength that comes from purpose. And that's what happens when you leverage the strength that comes from purpose. It allows you to maximize your growth potential in representing the kingdom of God, pursuing success, pursuing your destiny. In other words, the very best of who you are can emerge when we understand how to maximize our growth potential. But Egypt is working hard to keep the best version of who we are from emerging. So Yeshua died to correct errors in purpose that lead to sin. You know, one of the things that we have discovered here at the Purpose Development Institute is that sin is simply the absence of purpose. So we continue to leave the believer at risk of making errors in their purpose, which lead to sin. And Yeshua died to correct that, but the church leaves the door open for believers to continue to make errors in purpose. So guess what? It's time for you to make a different move in your ministry. It's time for you to make a different move in your assignment of what God has called you to do. So your next ministry move is to help believers make moves to maximize their growth potential so they can play their part in correcting the errors in purpose. That's the reason why at the Purpose Development Institute, we focus on helping believers raise their purpose IQ, because we want to help them play their part in correcting those errors in purpose that lead to sin, so that now they can close the door to sin. They can submit to God. They can resist the devil, and they can add value to the world. So guess what? It is now time for you to make a move. So here's what I need you to do. Make sure that you contact me for an extreme purpose makeover consultation. You know, God has blessed the Purpose Development Institute to be able to work with so many powerful men and women of God to optimize their ministry from the top to the bottom with our extreme purpose makeover initiative. And I want to share that with you. So make sure that you contact me at the email that you see on the screen, mycoach@newbreedachievers.com. Let's get started today. Let's make that move. You cannot afford to continue to minister to the believer's heart without making this move to help them raise their purpose IQ. So again, this is Donald Jenkins, your master purpose development coach, and I'm excited to be able to share this insight with you on a truth that cannot be ignored. Now you know. So make sure that you share this video, all these videos, with other men and women of God in your network, so that they will know. If we can spread this word, and I promise you, we will begin to put the church in a position to minimize the influence of the kingdom of darkness. So join me in this crusade of an extreme purpose makeover. Make sure you share this insight, and I look forward to sharing more with you as we prepare you for an extreme purpose makeover. God bless you.